phalanx of advocates, of friends, and unfortunately of victims. The gun violence epidemic is an abomination, but what is even harder to understand is Congress's inability to do anything about it. And I'm really glad to be joined here today by, of course, my partner in Connecticut, Senator Blumenthal, to be joined here today by Senator Cortez Masto, who is at the same time grieving and advocating for change, and Senator Durbin, who will be joining us as well. But before I say a few words on the news of the day, which is the introduction of our new background checks legislation to make sure that every gun sale that is conducted in this country be done with a background check to make sure that the purchaser is not a criminal or someone who is seriously mentally ill. I want you to hear from three people. I want you to hear from Judy and Wayne Richardson, whose child was killed by a weapon that was bought at a gun show. They've been very active on this issue of background checks ever since. And then Nardin Jeffries, whose child was wrapped up in one of the most horrific murders in recent memory here in the city of Washington, D.C. So if you'd all please give a round of meaningful applause to Judy and Wayne Richardson.
Thank you for the opportunity to stand here today in our nation's capital alongside gun violence prevention champions, advocates, and survivors. Today we want to tell you about our daughter Darian and to tell you why this legislation is so important and can help save lives. Darian was beautiful, vibrant, and kind. She was accomplished and hardworking. Education was very important to her. Her dream was to be a teacher. Darian was also a social butterfly who loved to dance. She sought out and found only the good in everyone she met. Darian had a smile that would light up every room. She was loved by many and missed by all who know her. She was a shining star whose light can never be dimmed. On January 8, 2010, our 25-year-old daughter was sleeping in her bed when masked intruders burst into her bedroom and started shooting. Darian was shot several times and rushed to the hospital. She spent 2 days in intensive care and nearly 3 more weeks in the hospital, suffering excruciating pain as she worked really hard to recover. Tragically, our beautiful daughter would later die of complications caused by her gunshot wounds. As her parents, we shared her anguish in each of those 21 days in the hospital. We continue to bear our heartbreak, but we'll never stop being her voice, as her voice has been silenced. To this day, 7.5 years later, our daughter's homicide remains unsolved. Investigators did recover the gun used in her shooting. Sadly, it was found at the scene of another murder of a young man in Portland, Maine, just 1 month later. The investigation of our daughter's case went cold there. In part, we learned because the .45 caliber handgun that was used in both shootings had been sold through a private sale in our home state of Maine at a gun show. No background check, no records kept. Think about that. 2 young people dead from the same handgun that was sold without a background check. Every single day, all throughout America, gun violence ends the lives of the people we hold most dear. Our neighbors, our parents, our children. In fact, more than 90 Americans die by a gunshot each day, and hundreds more are wounded. We are here to be the voice for the voiceless. I applaud Senators Chris Murphy, Dick Durbin, and Richard Blumenthal for introducing this Background Check Expansion Act, and I thank all senators here today for supporting this important bill. With leadership like yours, I'm hopeful that we can prevent more lives from being senselessly ended. It's too late to save our Darian, but it's not too late to save others. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Nardin Jeffries. I live here in Washington, D.C., and I carry around my daughter's autopsy picture because I like to show, unfortunately, the real images of gun violence. I used to carry her picture prior to gun violence, but this is not the real depiction of gun violence. Brichelle was 16 years old, and she was gunned down on March 30th, 2010, on South Capitol Street, known as the South Capitol Street Massacre. She was one of 9 shot, one of 3 that died at the scene. She was shot in the head with an AK-47 and also in the shoulder. There were 2 other caliber weapons used, a .45 and a 9mm extended clip. I hear a lot of our lawmakers and even people that like to hide behind the Second Amendment rights say that certain laws would not have prevented the tragedy that killed my only child and other people around America. And that is just a cop-out. That is not true. It may not save every life, and we understand that, but we're trying to prevent more casualties and more tragedies from happening. Gun violence is not a black thing, a poor thing, a gang thing, inner city thing, or all the other stereotypes that people like to put on it. This is a human thing, and human beings are being slaughtered daily in this first world industrialized country, and that is not the America I grew up in. My father used those same type of weapons to kill Brichelle and the victims in Aurora movie theaters, Sandy Hook, all over America to defend this country. He was in the Army, and we can do better than what we're doing. I commend the senators for inviting us here and fighting effortlessly for future Americans, because we really are all targets at any given moment. As I stand here, I'm always panning around because I don't know when the next shooting will happen. And shootings are not, I know the media likes to point a lot of attention on mass shootings, but this happens every single day. Not just here in Washington, D.C., where I live, but all over America. There are people gunned down. There are people that are taking their own lives because guns are too easily accessible. We do not need assault weapons on the streets. We just do not. We're supposed to be a first world country and an industrialized nation, and I just feel like, we're really going backwards really quickly. Children should have the right to grow up. We should have the right to grow old, and we should have this right to be able to live amongst each other safely, and that is not the case. We all breathe the same air, and we all bleed the same color blood. So we have to stand united, and I want to urge everyone in this city to come down here repetitively, call any and everyone in these buildings and demand that we do better as a country, as a nation, as human beings. Because like I said, this can happen to anyone. Brichelle was on her way to college at 16 years old and never made it there. So I just want to say again, thank you to Senator Murphy and Blumenthal, for inviting us here to speak. I am the voice for my dead daughter who is no longer here. I'm the voice for many voiceless victims. I am the voice for a lot of people here in DC who feel like they don't matter because our skin looks different than other people who are also in this same tragedy. And I want everyone to know that's just not the case. We are all in this together, and we need to start acting as such. Thank you.
Judy and Wayne, Nardin, thank you very much for your words. We're going to be closed today by Tom Mauser, another family member living with the grief of gun violence. Listen, this happens nowhere else but in the United States. There's no other country in the first world that witnesses this kind of regular massacre. 90 people dying every day at the hands of guns. The cable news shows lit up every few weeks with news of another large-scale massacre. This only happens here in the United States, but it means that there are public policy reasons why the slaughter, the carnage happens here at an epidemic rate. The fact of the matter is, every year across this country, over 100,000 people are stopped from buying guns because of our background check system. That means over 100,000 people with serious criminal records or serious mental illnesses are stopped from buying a gun. And yet, today, as many as 25% of all gun sales happen without a background check, because gun sales have migrated to places where they are not required. Predominantly, as the Richardsons noted, gun shows, but also to online sales. And so we've got a big glaring loophole in our law today that allows for tens of thousands of weapons to be transferred to people with serious criminal histories. And what we know is that when you tighten those loopholes, lives are saved. Just look at the issue of domestic violence. In states that have universal background checks laws, 47% less women die at the hands of gun use by an intimate partner. That's not 5% less. That's not 20% less. That's 50% less deaths due to domestic violence in states that decide to make sure that only law-abiding citizens get guns. But even if you have a strong state law, like Connecticut does, you are not immune from these loopholes. The guns that are sold in our cities, like Chicago and Washington, D.C., and Bridgeport and New Haven, they don't come from Illinois and Connecticut and Washington, D.C. predominantly. They come from other places where criminals can walk into gun shows and buy a truck full of weapons without going through a background check and then bring them to other jurisdictions and sell them. If we want to have a downward effect on the rate of murder in this country, then you have to make sure that criminals don't own guns. Finally, universal background checks are connected to national security. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are openly recruiting for people in the United States to go buy guns at gun shows and use them to kill civilians. When a plane was used to attack U.S. civilians, we changed our law to make it harder for people to use a plane as a weapon against us. Well, guess what? Now the terrorists have decided to use weapons of mass destruction that are a little bit smaller, called assault weapons. And they found out that you can get them without a criminal background check. Why are we not adjusting our laws to protect from these new tactics? Our legislation would make sure that commercial sales in this country include a background check. Our legislation includes common sense exceptions to make sure that if you're gifting a firearm to a relative, or you're letting a neighbor borrow it for hunting, or you're temporarily transferring it to someone for self-defense, you don't have to go through a background check. This law includes common sense exceptions. But it says once and for all that if you're going to buy a gun in commerce in this country, just prove that you're not a criminal. And by the way, 90% of Americans support this. 90% of gun owners support this. 75% of NRA members support it. There's only one issue like this where 9 out of 10 Americans support it and Congress can't get it done. That's on this issue of universal background checks. With that, let me turn the podium over to someone who has been carrying this torch on behalf of his constituents for a long, long time, Senator Dick Durbin.
Senator Murphy, Senator Blumenthal, Senator Cortez Masto, and especially the families that have come out to tell their heartbreaking stories. I was going through the internet the other day and I saw a time lapse of what happened in Las Vegas. I couldn't stand to watch it to the end, but I forced myself to. It showed all of these concert goers huddling on the ground, waiting for the shooting to stop. And it showed desperate efforts to pump the chests of those who'd already been shot, trying to save their lives. And you think to yourself, where would this have happened? How could this have happened? And we know, sadly we know, it happened in the same country where someone walked into a first grade classroom in Connecticut and killed innocent children and their teachers. It happened in the same country where in the city of Chicago, which I'm honored to represent, We've seen so far this year 3,000 gunshot victims and 500 gun deaths in the city of Chicago. So far this year. And our city is not alone in this situation. And as was said by one of the earlier speakers, do we have the universal answer to stop every incident of gun violence? No. But we do have one approach here that we introduced today in common. An approach that I hate to correct Chris Murphy, but the latest poll shows that the public support on this has gone from 90% to 94% for comprehensive background checks, including 93% by gun owners who support a comprehensive background check. The public sentiment is overwhelming. Think of another issue in America that 94% of the people agree on. They agree on this. And when you hear this, you have to ask, in a representative democracy, what is going to happen? If 94% of the people are ready, why isn't the Congress ready? Well, that's why we're here today. We're here today to say that we're ready to go to work. And we've done it before, we'll do it again. We're going to keep this issue before the American people. God forbid there'll be another gun tragedy, but you know, as sure as I stand here, there will be. Sadly, there will be. And woe to those who have come up with an excuse of why they can do nothing about it, want to lift nothing, no fingers, no effort to do anything about it. How are they ever going to justify this and explain this in a nation that is sick of gun violence and gun death? How will they explain it to these families who've lost someone they dearly love to random gun violence? How can we explain it in this great nation of America? Want to make America great again? Do something about gun violence.
Thanks to Dick Durbin, who has been a champion before Chris Murphy and I arrived here. We have worked together because we became members of a club no one wants to join, senators from a state who experienced a unspeakable, unimaginable tragedy at Newtown, and we have worked since with others who are more recent members of that club. Senator Cortez Masto, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your courage and strength in the face of that horrendous tragedy in Las Vegas. And thank you to all the survivors and advocates who are here. You know, I'm reminded by the Brady campaign t-shirt. Jim Brady was shot and paralyzed, and Ronald Reagan was almost assassinated. It still took 10 years for the Brady Law to become a measure in the United States Congress. So we are here for the long haul, for the marathon, not the sprint. And let Donald Trump hear this message. We are not going away. We are not giving up. We are going to continue fighting as long as people are dying. That's our pledge to the advocates here today. And in fact, the vice-like grip of the gun lobby on this institution behind me is loosening. We've seen the state referenda going our way, candidates elected who side with us. Across the country, eventually, that 94% will prevail for common sense measures like background checks, and we've already introduced legislation that will repeal the legal immunity now enjoyed uniquely by the gun manufacturers, bump stocks. We're going to be moving ahead on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Today's measure is part of a total agenda to make America safer. It's that simple. We're going to make America safer, and we're going to do it because of the upsurge and outcry from the American people in the face of tragedies like Las Vegas and Newtown, Orlando, San Bernardino, Virginia Tech. It has now become a liturgy of tragedy in America. And the ones that I think often are most persuasive to me, along with the victims and survivors, are members of the law enforcement community. You know, I was a prosecutor for many years. I was a federal prosecutor. Then I was my state's attorney general. The ones who know the end of a gun barrel are the folks who enforce the law, and they are overwhelmingly, almost 100% in favor of this kind of common sense protection because they face the threat of gun violence every day, and they see the casualties every day. Not necessarily in the mass shootings, but literally one by one, day by day, 90 every day, 30,000 every year. The toll of blood and finished futures is inescapable as long as we have no checks for people who can buy guns from others who may have just committed crimes and want to sell the crime gun or stolen guns or simply at gun shows. This kind of toll can and should be stopped, and with your help today, we're going to make sure that it is stopped with background checks that are no imposition, no burden for law-abiding citizens. Keep guns out of the hands of dangerous criminals. That's the message for Donald Trump today, and there is no getting around the truth of that message. So let me introduce Senator Cortez Masto, who has been very eloquent and powerful on this topic. Thank you.
First of all, let me say thank you to my colleagues, Chris Murphy, Dick Blumenthal, Dick Durbin, Dianne Feinstein. I so appreciate their advocacy on this issue. And then to the families, thank you for using your voices, being an advocate, and to all of the incredible organizations that are here, because it's something that we all know. It is not time, it is past time to reduce gun violence in this country. This is common sense. It's common sense. You know, I was the Attorney General, like Dick, I was a federal prosecutor, Attorney General in the state of Nevada, and I will guarantee you, law enforcement, and there are so many people that I know that I've worked with that support reducing gun violence, that support common sense measures that protect our loved ones, that protect our friends. You know, I'm sad to say, and that Las Vegas now unfortunately has the moniker of being the deadliest site for a massacre with 58 who lost their lives, over 500 who were injured, and 22,000 innocent concert goers who were terrorized by one madman who had access to guns and didn't care how he utilized them. And I hear people say all the time, even if we had this or even if we passed that, that wouldn't have stopped what happened in Las Vegas. But I can guarantee you, if we have universal background checks, we are going to save a life, and that's what this is about. It is saving the lives in the future and ensuring we are reducing that gun violence. You know, that's why Nevada, actually, when I was elected, there was a ballot initiative, question 1, to pass universal background checks in the state of Nevada, and it passed with the majority of Nevadans supporting it. And I will tell you, it is just common sense. I come from a Nevada, a family of hunters. My husband is a retired Secret Service agent. We own guns. This isn't about taking away somebody's Second Amendment rights or taking away somebody's guns. It is about passing common sense measures for gun safety to save lives. Now, who could be against saving lives? Universal background checks to ensure that those individuals that shouldn't have guns do not get them, to close the private gun show loopholes, to make sure somebody cannot buy a gun on the internet without raising a red flag somewhere, somebody ensuring that we are checking to make sure they're safe to have those guns. That's what this is about. That's what passed in Nevada, And that's why this bill is so important, because now we need to make it pass across this country. Across this country, it's time to fight. And now more than ever, I see the advocacy and the wave of people that understand that this is just common sense. This is gun safety. This is reducing violence in our communities. It is about protecting our family. It is about protecting our loved ones. It is ensuring that no one, whether you're seriously mentally ill, you're a terrorist, that you should not have access to weapons that can harm others. And that's why I am proud to stand here with my colleagues and co-sponsor this bill. It is time to get something done, and let's start with universal background checks in this country. Thank you all so much for your support.
Let's finish up with just a fantastic advocate who's worked all across the country advocating for greater background checks. His son was killed in the Columbine tragedy. Please welcome with a round of applause Tom Mauser.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you all for being here. Thanks for inviting me to speak. I first got involved in this issue in 1999 based on a simple question. My son Daniel was a member of the debate team at Columbine High School and heard a conversation, and that conversation led to a question at the dinner table out of the blue. He asked, "Dad, did you know there were loopholes in the Brady Bill?" And sadly, I didn't really engage in conversation. It was a very short conversation. I just told him, no, I didn't know about that. 2 weeks later, he was killed with a gun that was purchased through a loophole in the Brady Bill. As you may know, the two killers bought 3 of their 4 guns at a gun show. They went there with an 18-year-old who bought the guns for them, and they purposely went to the table of a private seller. Why? Because they didn't want a paper trail. They didn't want a background check. They wanted no trace of what they were doing. And in fact, the young woman who bought those guns for them later testified she would not have made the purchase if she had to go through paperwork. That is the gun show loophole. I was determined to close that loophole and other loopholes in the Brady Bill based on my son's words. So I took a 1-year leave of absence from my job, and I went to work for an organization called Save Colorado, attempting to lobby the state legislature. When they failed to close the gun show loophole in Colorado, we at Save Colorado took it to a vote of the people in 2000. And I served as the spokesperson for that. And my message to people was a very simple one. Does it make sense that a felon or a mentally deranged person or a domestic abuser can go into a gun show and at one table have to go through a background check and not be able to buy a gun? You can just walk across the aisle to another table and buy a gun, no background check, no questions asked. People of Colorado got it. They voted 70% to 30%, and they closed the gun show loophole in Colorado. They got it. In that same election, that same day, the people of Oregon did the same. The vote there was 60% to 40%. These are Western pro-gun hunting states, but people got it, and they closed that loophole. The opponents said, oh, if you do this, it'll ruin gun shows. I can assure you that gun shows are still alive and well in Colorado. Then in 2013, in Colorado, we took the next step. We put in universal background checks to close the rest of the loopholes. And what is the result of this? What has it meant? Well, I'll give you an example. In 2016, in Colorado, we conducted about 389,000 background checks. 20,000 of those were private sales, and 450 of those 20,000 were prohibited. We stopped those gun sales. I'm damn glad we stopped those gun sales. How many lives were saved because those 450 were stopped? That's what it's all about. Now it's 18 years later, and I'm still walking in my son's shoes. Literally. These are the shoes my son was wearing that day in 1999. I've taken his place in this great debate, and I want to see the rest of these loopholes closed. This is a loophole. These are loopholes in federal law. And if they're loopholes in federal law, they should be closed at the federal level. We shouldn't have to be doing this state by state. Guns cross state borders just as easily as a car crosses a state border. That's why we need to have it done across the nation. We know that people support this. Upwards of 90%. Look, if 70% of the people in Colorado voted to close the gun show loophole, and now well over 80% in Colorado support universal background checks, it shows that people are satisfied with what's happened. It's working well. They want to see more. I'm just so sick and tired of all this talk about the bad guys with the guns. Don't be talking about the bad guys with the guns if you're not willing to stop the bad guy from getting the gun in the first place. You've got to do something to keep it from them. The bottom line is, are we going to make it easy for the bad guys to get guns? Or are we going to make it difficult? Are we going to make it easy? Or are we going to make it difficult? The people have spoken. The people get it. The 90% get it. We need the people there now to get it. They need to get it. They need to have the courage to say, you know, you're right, and maybe we should start listening to the 90%. Thank you for introducing this, and we will keep fighting and fighting and fighting.
Well, now that we're up to 94%, I think the 6% is Republican members of Congress and staff at the NRA. So, listen, we'd be happy to open it up to questions that that members of the media have.
I guess, is there, you talked a little bit about it, about being here for the long haul, but is there a possible path forward with this piece of legislation now?
Well, I will never say never, but I'm not naive. I understand that the NRA, for the moment, has a bit of a vice grip on a Republican-controlled House and Senate. But we will continue to press this case. We came close in 2013. In 2016, on the issue of closing one particular loophole that allowed terrorists to get guns, we got more Republican votes than ever before. But I understand we're in this for the long haul. Every great social change movement had failures before it had successes. And the gun industry had 30 years head start on the anti-gun violence movement to build up a political powerhouse. We're getting stronger every single day. And now that we've introduced this legislation, Republicans will have a choice. They can sign on to this legislation, they can introduce their own alternative, or they can stand in the way. And I will tell you, if they stand in the way, their future will look very much like Kelly Ayotte's present. She's a senator that opposed background checks in 2013, and she lost her seat, in part because the anti-gun violence movement descended upon New Hampshire and made sure that people understood that she was voting against 90% of her constituents. Now, we're not strong enough to play in every Senate race right now, but we have more resources and more people every year. And so now that we have this legislation introduced, Republicans will have a choice, and if they choose wrong, then I truly believe more now than ever their electoral future is in jeopardy.
Let me just add one point, which is obvious to everyone who has been in Washington for longer than 24 hours. The unpredictable happens. The impossible happens, particularly in these last 10 months. And something is changing in this country fundamentally. Something is moving. And you can see it in the energy of the groups that are here today, which have inaugurated a new chapter in the movement against gun violence. You know, when I first advocated successfully for a ban on assault weapons in the state of Connecticut in the early 1990s, we had nothing like this grassroots movement. Then came the Brady campaign. Now we have Moms Demand Action. We have the Pride Fund. We have all of the groups that are represented here today, including a number from Connecticut, the Newtown Action Alliance, Sandy Hook Promise. We have a grassroots movement that is growing. So it may not be this year, but the impossible is happening these days in Washington. And I think we can make it happen even better than we have before.
Senator, what can you say to critics that argue it won't stop bad people from selling to bad people?
It does, well, it stops bad people from getting guns today. It stops 120,000 gun sales last year alone. And the way that bad people sell to bad people is by first getting their guns without a background check. So how do the bad people sell to bad people in Bridgeport, Connecticut? They first buy those guns at a gun show in South Carolina, and they bring them to Connecticut. So you have to you have to get a weapon into the system of commerce first. And when so many of them first arrive into commerce without a background check, it allows bad people to get their hands on them and sell them to other people. So you would be able to stop lots of bad people from transferring weapons to other bad people if you made sure that they first couldn't get their hands on weapons outside of the background check system.
And you know, we've never said that background checks are going to stop every gun violence death, but it will save some lives. And a ban on assault weapons won't stop every gun violence death, but it will save some lives. The gun lobby trap is to point to a mass shooting and say that reform wouldn't have stopped that atrocity. That's a trap, because we know that there are some acts of violence that are going to occur even with the best laws and even with this law. But we can save lives. There's no question about it. And if it simply stops good people from selling guns to bad people, that will save a lot of lives.
Senators, what do you say to those whose argument is, you know, once you change one thing, it's kind of a slippery slope, and then they'll want to change another thing, and that's kind of the argument you always hear back?
Well, the only people who says that are the gun industry. I mean, you know, that's a fiction. You know, that slippery slope argument is a wholesale, total, complete other fiction developed by the gun industry. Remember, the gun industry's model is different than it was 40 years ago. They now sell 50% of weapons to 3% of Americans. And so their business model is based upon scaring people that the government is going to come confiscate your weapons, and so you better buy as many as you can now before all of the laws change. Dick and I are both supporters of the Second Amendment, and we're standing with 90% of gun owners in this country when we call on the country to adopt a universal background checks system. So that's, I hear that, that question, but that's a creation of the gun industry to try to create an irrational fear about what the motivation is.
Can I ask about something separate that you're both a part of, which was the bump stock, that bill? Has anything happened since you introduced that?
I'm hopeful that we will have a hearing on it in the Judiciary Committee. Senator Feinstein and I have advocated for the bump stock bill. I think there's clear common ground there, a bipartisan consensus that we need to stop the sale of a device that very simply circumvents the ban on automatic weapons. It converts a semi-automatic into a machine gun style automatic weapon, and it should be banned. And it is banned, in fact, implicitly under the current law, but there is a loophole that enables it to go forward. I'm hopeful that we will have hearings, and we're talking to the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee about it.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Can we get a picture?
Yeah.
Here?
Yeah, let's get
Stay
a
where you
match.
are for a second, guys. Stay where you are.